Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're going to dive into something you might not have in your pantry yet, organic butter powder. Now, it sounds pretty straightforward, but you'll see that the science, the regulations, and the sheer engineering behind this stuff are actually surprisingly complex. You know, the whole point of this product is to solve a really big problem. Whether you're a camper, a baker, or getting your emergency kit ready. How in the world do you take something as perishable as butter and make it last for years, maybe even decades, with no fridge?
And the answer? It's kind of mind-blowing. When you store it correctly, we are talking about a shelf life of 10 to an absolutely insane 25 years. This extreme longevity, well, that's its biggest promise and the main reason anyone thinking about long-term food storage is interested.
So, to figure out how this is even possible, here's what we're going to break down. We'll start with the basic science, then look at the two totally different kinds of butter powder out there. We'll unpack why it costs so much, see how it actually holds up in the kitchen, and finally, ask the big question, is the trade-off worth it? Okay, so at its core, the promise is super simple. Give you all the rich, creamy flavor and usefulness of real butter, but in a form that's lightweight, won't spoil, and is just incredibly convenient.
But right away we hit our first snag. Turns out you can't just, dehydrate butter and call it good. The science of turning a solid fat into a stable powder is a huge technical challenge.
The magic behind this is a technology called spray drying. Basically, you take liquid butter, spray it as a superfine mist into a really hot chamber. The water evaporates almost instantly, and what's left behind are these tiny little particles of butter solids. And just like that, you've got powder. Okay, but here's the real problem. Pure butterfat by itself is, well, it's really unstable as a powder. All that fat loves to leak oil, and worse, it's prone to oxidation. That's just a fancy way of saying it goes rancid. So pure powdered butter just wouldn't last. So, to get around this, manufacturers use this really cool technique called microencapsulation. The best way to think about it is like putting tiny little armored shields around every single fat molecule. These shields, which are called carriers, protect the fat from oxygen, stop it from going rancid, and that is the secret to that 25-year shelf life. And this is where things get really interesting. What those little shields are made of, that's the central conflict in the whole butter powder world. The choice of that carrier ingredient sends manufacturers down two completely different paths, and it creates two very different products. So on one side, you've got your dairy solid blends. They use organic, non-fat dry milk as that protective carrier. And then on a totally different track, you've got these high-fat keto blends. These use specialized stuff like organic gums and lecithin, and they're designed to pack in as much fat as possible. Okay, so what's really fascinating here is how this choice totally changes the numbers. Just look at the fat density. The dairy blend, using milk solids, comes in around 6.67 calories per gram, but the keto blend, using those special gums, hits a much higher 8 calories per gram. That is a huge difference when we're talking about caloric efficiency. And this chart just makes it crystal clear, right? If you're on a strict keto diet where every gram of fat is critical, or you're a prepper who wants the most calories for the least weight, that keto blend is the obvious winner. The dairy blend is basically watered down with milk solids, so you get less fat density.
So you're probably asking, why would anyone buy the one with less fat? Well, a lot of it boils down to cost. And to understand the price, we have to wade through the complicated and pretty expensive regulatory maze for organic products.
First up, if you want that official USDA organic seal on your package, your product has to be at least 95% certified organic ingredients. That's not just the butter, it's also the carrier like that non-fat dry milk. It all has to be organic. And it doesn't stop there. If you want to slap a grass-fed label on it, the cow's diet has to be at least 95% grass. So suddenly, these companies are trying to juggle two different, really strict 95% rules, which just adds another layer of cost and hassle.
And this gets down to the tiniest ingredients. See, most powders use something called silicon dioxide to stop them from clumping up. But you can't use that if you want the organic seal. Nope. So companies have to go out and find a more expensive organic-friendly option, like ground rice hulls.
And all of this creates what we can call a dual compliance friction, the headache of finding ingredients that are both organic and grass-fed, plus all these special alternatives. That's why this stuff costs so much. It's a direct result of that regulatory pileup. All right, so after all that science and regulation, how does this stuff actually work in the kitchen? Let's talk about what happens when you actually try to use it. Yeah, this quote from a user pretty much nails the product's biggest weakness, reconstitution. When you just add water, trying to turn it back into regular butter, the results can be, well, a little disappointing. You often get this thin, runny liquid, not that creamy, spreadable butter you were dreaming of.
And that's why this powder is an absolute rock star for dry uses. Shaking it over popcorn, roasted veggies, snacks, it's perfect. In baking, you just mix it in with your flour and other dry stuff. Now, if you really want to try making a spread, the trick is a 3-to-1 ratio of powder to water. That seems to be the sweet spot. And of course, just remember, once you add water, all that shelf stability is gone. It has to go in the fridge.
So, this brings us to the big picture. You have to realize butter powder isn't trying to compete with the stick of butter in your fridge. It's competing against other long-term storage fats.
And this slide just lays it all out. When you compare it to canned butter or ghee, the taste and texture of reconstituted butter powder is just fair. But look at the shelf life. It lasts more than 10 times longer. You are making a very clear choice. You're picking insane longevity over a perfect taste experience.
So, let's wrap this all up. Butter powder is an incredible piece of food engineering. Which one you buy, the dairy blend or the keto one, really depends on what you need it for. That premium price tag, it's totally justified by all those regulatory hoops. And at the end of the day, its real value is that crazy long shelf life, not that it tastes exactly like fresh butter.
So that leaves us with one last question for you to think about. When you're stocking your own pantry for the long haul, what's more important, perfect flavor now or ultimate survival later?